Thank you very much, Charlene, uh, for that information. And so we're going to move right into our first set of presenters. We're going to be discussing building relationships, and we have Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean and Ms. Helene de Jong. So Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean is an Afrocentric community psychologist, program coordinator, and assistant professor of psychology at the University of the Bahamas. Her professional appointments and honors are both local and international and include chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee. Presenting alongside Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell-Dean is going to be Ms. Helene de Jong. Helene is a school counselor at Life for Key International School and the Focus Program. She is also a resilience trainer for the Flourishing Center, as well as a certified life coach. She is originally from the United States, but now calls the Bahamas home after living here for 15 years. Helene obtained a BA in Justice from American University in Washington, D.C. She worked as a parole and probation officer in Maryland before obtaining a teaching degree from George Mason University. She obtained an MED in Counseling and Development from Lamar University. Helene taught in New Delhi, India, Niambi, Nigeria, and Kampala, Uganda before moving on to Nassau. She is passionate about well-being and flourishing and helping others to thrive. Dr. Niambi and Helene.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just sharing my screen. You can give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Yeah? Okay, great. All right, so I am excited to be with you this morning. Honestly, there's so much just going on in the world today and in the country right now that it's great to be able to have a break and just talk about character for the time that we have with you. And so Helene and I are going to be focusing on effective communication. And we hope that you're able to see the link of the things that we're going to talk about in this presentation throughout the workshop today and be able to use these in your character day activities, but also just throughout your teaching experiences and your living experiences in general. So when we're talking about effective communication, we really want to focus on, or we're going to focus on first, some of the ways that we communicate that are not effective, right? And so we're not necessarily placing a judgment on any of these communication styles, right? We're just saying what is optimal and what might not be, or what may be suboptimal. And so the first one that we're going to take a look at is passive communication, a passive communication style. And so with passive communication, the individual that communicates passively is trying to avoid conflict, right? They may be trying to avoid conflict because they may be like me, someone who just doesn't like to engage in conflict. You know, if you see conflict, you kind of run the other way. Or they may be engaged in passive communication because they are trying to seek sympathy, right? And they feel like being a passive communicator will give them the sympathy that they are looking for. Now, the problem with passive communication is that others may feel frustrated or confused regarding your needs because a passive communicator is not clear with what it is that they are seeking in the communication relationship. Opportunities can be lost, and this can result in stress and resentment. And so when this happens, the personal needs of the individual that is communicating passively are not met. And because they are not met, we say that this can result in a form of violence towards yourself, right? Because if you are a passive communicator, you may be avoiding the conflict, but the need that you have is not met. It's not resolved. The issue is not focused on because you just avoided it. So it doesn't go anywhere. It's still there, but you've just avoided it. So what does an example of a passive communicator look like? The passive communicator may look like the person, or may look like a situation where, let's say you're in conversation with a friend, not necessarily a close friend, but someone that you admire, you like, or maybe a work colleague. And in the conversation, they say something that you find objectionable. Or let's say they say something about a group of people that is disparaging, or even prejudicial, or just something that's not very nice. And you don't want to ruffle their feathers, right? You totally disagree with what it is that they said. You couldn't be farther from that perspective at all. But you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. And so maybe you just laugh it off and say, oh, yeah, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right? But then every time you see that person, you think about what they said and it kind of bothers you. And then every time you see them, or you might just start avoiding them and they're not clear why. So that's the passive communication. I have a lot to go through. I could go on forever with the examples, but let me keep going. Okay, so then we have the aggressive communication. And with aggressive communication, the goal is to win at all costs. Right? And as we're going through, if one of these communication styles like touches you, hits your heart, just let me know, if you identify with this one. So the aggressive communication, and this may be more familiar with us because in our society, we kind of value aggressive communicators because we perceive them as people who don't play, they don't mess around, right? When they have something to say, they're going to let you know, and they say it. Now, this can be beneficial, but it can also be problematic because it can cause others to feel intimidated, humiliated, and defensive, right? Aggressive communicators, you can lose trust, and it can cause a hostility or passive aggressive responses. And one of the things that we see with aggressive communication is that only the individual's needs are met, right? Because that aggressive person is going to say, no, you're going to hear what I have to say, right? And it can result in violence towards others because if you come at me aggressively, you don't know me. So I coming at you aggressively. You talk loud, I talk louder. You stand up, I jump up, right? And so aggressive communication escalates. And sometimes because it's just escalating, there is no resolve, right? There's no way to bring it down, and violence can erupt. And this may be physical violence. It could be an emotional violence, a verbal violence. And we see aggressive communication in many areas of our society. We see it in Parliament. We see it on the street. We see it on TV. And it's very familiar to us. There are definitely gender differences in the way aggressive communicators are perceived. I think we kind of value aggressiveness more in men than in women, and that can be something that y'all can let me know if you agree with or not, but that's aggressive communication style that may not be the best at getting the message across. So you're like, okay, we have passive, we have aggressive. There's another one that doesn't work. Yes, indeed. Passive aggressiveness communication, which might be my communication style of choice when trying to be a little bit aggressive with someone, but not, in your face aggressive. And so the passive aggressive communication style is where we demonstrate aggression, but we're demonstrating it indirectly. indirectly. So if anybody can identify with that, let me know in the chat. Let us know on your screens. The passive aggressive communicator is the one who does not get their needs met because they're not letting the other person know what their needs actually are, right? And so this type of communication can result in violence towards both parties. The problem remains unresolved and the person feels frustrated, right? So what does passive aggressive communication look like? Passive aggressive communication can look like when you are having a disagreement with someone, and let's say the disagreement was yesterday and the disagreement ends, and then they come to you the next day and they're like, you know, everything cool, right? We're good. Yeah, we cool. Okay, I'm glad that we're okay. Yeah. So we could go to lunch later, right? Because we're supposed to go to, I don't know. I'll see how I feel. Right? So clearly your body language and the way that you're acting is demonstrating that you have a problem, right? Everything is not cool. But the words that you're saying is, yes, we're good, we're okay, we're cool. So you're trying to make that person feel a certain way, but you don't want to just come out and say it. It's kind of on the I don't want to say it's passively aggressive, as is demonstrated. So we have passive aggressive. Nobody identifies with being passive aggressive. Just me? Really? Wow. Okay. All right. All right. So we have passive, we have aggressive, we have passive aggressive. So what is the communication style that we're trying to seek out? Well, we are looking for, or we're trying to be assertive communicators. This is the one that we would say is probably the most beneficial. And that's because assertive communication allows both parties to be heard, okay? Both parties to be heard with assertive communication. So assertive communication is the most beneficial because it seeks to solve the problem, right? I see someone in here saying they are very direct. Kelly Brathwaite, you're very direct. Okay, great, because assertive communication, we make direct statements, right? And so with this, others feel, but we're making direct statements now, not just to get our goal across, but to be clear with what your needs are and how the needs of the other person, and how that the person is affecting you and how you may be affecting the other person, right? So then both parties leave feeling seen, heard, valued, loved, and supported, right? Both bodies leave feeling respected and valued. And so this is a less stressful style of communication, okay? So with assertive communication, you have to be able, one of the key elements of assertive communication is being able to listen, to really hear what the other person is saying. And so Helene is going to come and share that with us. But before she does that, I want us to just look at some of the steps to act assertively. So the first step is that you have to identify the problem, right? And focus on the problem and not the individual. Now, this is a key point that is much easier to say than it is to do. Because let's say you have the example of the person who is saying something that is off center. You know, you could step to that person and say, why are you so stupid? Why are you talking about people like that? You have a problem, you just don't know what to say. You just need to right? And then you're just like making these you statements, and then that person is going to automatically defend themselves. But what you want to do is identify the problem that that individual is displaying and not make that person the problem. Okay. The second thing that we're going to do is specify the effects, state how the behavior is affecting you. You know, when you said this about that group of people, it made me feel such and such and such. You can provide consequences. Now, note that this is an optional step because in different relationships, there may be power dynamics that don't allow for you to provide consequences, right? If the person that said something off kilter is your boss, you might not be able to say, and if you don't stop saying that, I'm going to do this, this, and that, right? So we have to be careful with the way that we use the consequences. And then the last but not least is the alternative, right? Can the person verbally agree to another way of behaving? And one of the things I believe as a psychologist is that when people know different and better ways to behave, then they do that, right? But a lot of times people behave in ways that don't work for us because that's the only thing that they know. So if you can provide them with something that is equally beneficial and teach them a better way, then they can engage in that. Okay, and so we're going to have an opportunity, hopefully, to practice using these steps. But I'm going to let Helene come in now and tell us how listening can help us with that even more.
Thank you, Niambi, and good morning, everybody. As Niambi said, I'm going to shift gears to the listening part of communicating. And listening, when we're talking about acting, and speaking assertively, listening comes in, into play there because, as Niambi, pointed out, we want to focus on the behavior, and that requires having a conversation and hearing, from the other person what is going on. I have a good friend who says that listening helps nourish the soul of ourselves and the other people. And again, when we listen to somebody, they feel, they feel like, she said, seen, heard, loved, valued, and supported. My mom always said, God gave us one mouth and two ears. And, I was always encouraged, listen more than I speak. And in our world today, listening has become challenging. There's a TED Talk by Julian Treasure called 5 Ways to Listen Better. And hopefully that'll get dropped in the chat, and you can, I encourage you to take some time and listen to that. But our world is becoming noisier, and as it becomes noisier, our listening skills are diminishing. There's so many sources of media. Karen led us through, an icebreaker with, the vaccines and, what's going on here in the Bahamas. And, do I listen on Facebook? Do I listen on Instagram? Do I listen on, which news station? And we're also receiving our news in short bits. And Julian Treasure points out that we listen about 60% of the time, but we only retain about 25% of what we hear. And so that's a little bit dangerous, and our art of conversation is dying. And so I'm going to share with you an acronym that can help us, to practice that listening and to practice active listening. And this is from Julian Treasure's TED Talk. So if you can put on that next slide, Dr. Niambi. It's called RASA, R-A-S-A. And so the first R is receive. And that is, we pay attention. And I tell my students, are my eyes looking at the speaker? Is my body facing the speaker? Am I, giving them my full attention? I'm not talking to somebody else. I'm not, looking at my phone while somebody's talking to me. It's giving them the full attention so I can receive the message. The other one is to appreciate. So I'll, lean in and kind of say, nod my head, use my body language, say, yes, tell me more. Let them know that what, they're saying is being appreciated. Summarize is to kind of paraphrase for clarity, for understanding, and also, when somebody repeats back to me what I'm saying, in their own words, it helps me to feel like, okay, yeah, they heard me. They're getting it. And it also gives me an opportunity to clarify anything that maybe has been misinterpreted. And then, speaking of misinterpreting, ask questions, right? So maybe something leads to, you wanting more information. Oftentimes when somebody's talking, our brains are thinking about, oh, what am I going to say next? How am I going to respond to that? And using rasa encourages us just to be still, to be in the moment, to receive, appreciate, summarize, and then afterwards ask questions. Julian Treasure in the TED Talk encourages us to take 3 minutes every day and just listen. Filter through all the channels that are coming at us and to practice listening. If I were to sit and be still and listen right now for 3 minutes, I would notice the air conditioning. I might notice some birds outside. But I invite you to create for yourself a listening practice to strengthen our listening skills. And it's a great thing to model to our students and those around us. When we listen, we create understanding, and creating understanding helps to bring peace into our community and into the world. So I invite you, to think about, how are you going to listen even through this workshop? Be mindful of your listening as we continue through the next, couple of hours together. And so I'm going to turn it back to Niambi to continue with how now we put together the listening and the speaking part of communication.
Thank you, Helene. Okay, so Helene and I came up with a practice situation that probably all of you are familiar with in your classes, and wanted to see if we could go through how we could engage in this situation using an assertive communication style. And so how are we doing on time? And just let me know. But here's the situation, okay? So you've asked a student, thanks, Kerwin. You've asked the student to stop talking to their classmates and distracting other students. This will be the 3rd time that they have defied your request, okay? So you have the, chatty student in the class. I was gonna say chatty Kathy, but it could be chatty Charles too, right? Chattiness knows no gender. They're in the class, they're being distracted. You've asked them to stop. What do you do? So let's start off with looking at what we wouldn't want to do. So an aggressive teacher may, or we have a little bit of time. Does anybody want to share what they think the aggressive teacher would probably do? Shout, shout explanation.
I'll
Probably
read the chat for you. Show favoritism.
Mm-hmm.
So we have shout, show favoritism. Probably tell the student to get out of their class, kick students out, remove them from the class. So essentially, it's the same. Yeah.
Okay, so the aggressive teacher is going to make sure that that they are the one that is in control of this classroom, right? And they're going to make sure that they get their point across. And they may do that by just completely shouting at the student and being verbally aggressive. Now, a number of you said kick the student out of the classroom or tell the student to leave. And when Helene and I were going over that, we had that in the aggressive category at first, but then we said, you know what? Telling the student just to leave the class may fall actually under passive aggressive because you're not dealing with the issue. right? The student wants to talk, or at least you're not dealing with the issue directly. You're not letting the student know why what they're doing is problematic. And you're just kind of removing it from the classroom altogether. And so some of you may have some dissension on whether or not you think that's passive aggressive or not. But that's where we place that one.
I think it can go both ways, Niambi.
Sure.
I think it can go both ways. So it depends on the purpose and the person, right?
Okay.
So I might put you out of the class to exert my control, like to show you that I'm the boss in here, similar to what you would have said before. Like, you're not going to do anything in this class without me giving you permission to do it. And failure to do so, I'm going to show you that I can remove you. Or it's depending on that student, and the teacher may be a little intimidated and don't know how to deal with it. And so rather than addressing the student directly, they then, you know what, I don't want to deal with it, just go to the office. So I think it can go either way, depending on the teacher or that student relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and that's a really good point that you bring up, right? Because at the end of the day, it is about relationship. And when we are figuring out what type of communication style we want to have, we have to focus on, well, what is this relationship, right? And how do we value the relationship, and how can we keep the relationship? And so an assertive style of communication in the classroom with the teacher would be one in which the student's voice is respected, but also the teacher's role is respected, right? Respected and acknowledged. So an assertive communicating, let me put that slide back up. So the first step that we felt like the teacher would do is to identify the problem, right? And so if you yell at the student and say, what your problem is, right? Then you're now identifying the student themselves as the problem. So it may be more beneficial to pull that student to the side, give the rest of the class some work, and have ask the student, what's going on with you? Why are you so talkative today? Okay, and so you can let them know how the behavior is affecting the other students in the class, even though they may not be aware of it, right? And how their behavior is affecting you and your ability to concentrate and relay the message as a teacher. You can provide a consequence to that student, right? That, hey, this is the third time that I'm talking to you. If you don't straighten up, I can send you to the office or talk to your parents. And I see that Gary Lewis has given us an alternative, saying redirect them with a task, giving them a responsibility to engage them, to redirect their attention. Absolutely, right? So you're giving them something alternative to do that is going to not distract the other students. One of the other things that we talked about was probably allowing them to have a time saying, if you just focus right now and we have more time at the end of the class, then you can share what you want to talk about with everyone. Helene, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so the one thing, and I think, you had mentioned, focusing on the behavior and talking to the student, and as educators or anybody that deals with human beings, that all behavior is a form of communication, right? So the student who is consistently speaking in class and not listening to you, they're communicating something. And, we're all, going through a trauma collectively. And so, and we don't know what's going on at home with the student. So just to understand that as we're identifying the problem behavior, that the behavior is communicating something, and to take that time, to speak with the student and listen.
And to listen, absolutely. Right? That every time that you pull a student away is an opportunity to really listen to that student. And everybody likes to be listened to. Everyone appreciates feeling listened to and heard. Okay, so I think we may have 1 or 2 minutes for a question.
Yes, you do. You do have a few minutes for questions. And everyone, it may be easier to just type your questions in the chat so that you can get through them. We do have a comment from Glendina: anticipate the behavior and try to meet the need before the behavior occurs. And yes, that is a very good thing to happen. I think what we can address in this session as people put their questions together and type it in the chat is this can happen once you've already developed a relationship with your students and you kind of know them. What would you say for those teachers just going into a classroom, or youth workers just going into a situation where they don't really know these kids yet, but they may be confronted with the situation on day one as kids try to feel their way out and determine what I can get away with and what I can't?
I would, recommend, and I know, like, especially at Focus and, at school, the first few days are, build the relationships. Listen and spend some time building relationships. Niambi, I don't know what you want to add.
No, I mean, I would say that as well, that there's a saying or a cliche that kids don't care until they know how much you care, or something like that. I think I messed it up.
Right. And
Um,
Felicity posted similar to what Helene has said, always spend at least some time getting to know the kids. And I think that is very, very important. And, we go into a lot of situations with the assumptions that we know everything. And I know now in our culture, we're moving away from that. But the automatic assumption is when an adult walks into the room, we're ahead of that room and kids are to sit there, listen, and not have a voice. And so therefore that opportunity to develop a relationship is missed. And so I like that both Helene and Felicity are saying, hey, build a relationship. But I see Felicity's face, so I know she wants to say something. I'm going to stop talking.
No, I put it in the chat. These, which I knew she meant, which is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
yes, thank you for listening.
I can't remember where it comes from, either Niambi, but it's the same. And the only point I was making, Karen, was which you were saying what to do if you're thrown into a scenario, right? These aren't kids you know, but what I was trying to make in the chat is no matter how short the time is, so you're thrown into a situation with kids you don't know, and you may come up, like with kids you have to spend at least some time engaging and connecting immediately. It's the first thing. So, even if you're just presented with that situation and you're going to be with this given set of kids right now, it's like the reason you do icebreakers, they are not, it's really sort of foundational. So spend that 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 or whatever you have and just do that.
Absolutely. And one of the best and easiest ways to do that is to listen, right? As Helene had pointed out in her conversation, just opportunities to listen.
Yeah, and I like Carlene's comment, kids need to be seen as individuals and not just children. That's beautiful.
And I would also like to add to everything that you guys have said is that this also goes for adults. So I used kids because I know a lot of you guys are teachers, but some of you are also coming from other organizations, and just you have to deal with adults, and that's also important. Some of us are going to be placed in leadership roles, and forming those relationships early on is just as important with adults as they are with students, with kids. So I just want to use that little nugget as well. So we're out of time for this segment. You guys can continue to post questions in the chat, and if we have some time at the end, we will get back to them. We will see Helene and Niambi later on. Helene sooner than Niambi. But I just want to say thank you guys for a wonderful presentation. We appreciate the information that you would have shared with all of us today.